Morning everyone, Ohayo gozaimasu. And I would really like to thank the organizers for inviting me here. And especially for putting me after two great speakers who've talked about how new forms of creativity are changing the way we think about commons and different sorts of media. I've been working for a long time researching free software and things like creative content, Wikipedia. And so I've also been working in areas which seem to be really, really new. But what I'm going to talk about today is about how what seems to be new is in fact not. So this is a picture of a steam engine. It's from the 18th century. It's a Cornish pumping engine from Cornwall in the southwest of England. Cornwall was the Silicon Valley of the industrial age. Cornwall was where all the innovation took place during the Industrial Revolution, pretty much like Silicon Valley. There were lots of small engineers, small factories, sharing ideas and coming up with new things. The pace of growth was rapid and dramatic, and a lot of that was using the power of steam. So this was a steam engine that was used in coal mines, and it was used in coal mines to save labor. And this is something that is closely linked to a story that we all learn about in school. Now, I don't know what schools teach individually in different parts of the world, but it's probably all a pretty similar story. We're all taught that James Watt invented the steam engine, and in fact, that authoritative source of all human knowledge, Wikipedia, says James Watt's invention was key to the industrial age. It was a key invention of the Industrial Revolution. So it portrays this story of an inventor as one great genius who worked on his own, came up with something new out of the blue. In fact, that's not what happened. What happened was a little different. What happened was that James Watt, he took an invention, a steam engine that already existed. It was invented by a guy called Smeaton, but there were other steam engines before. James Watt took existing steam engines, improved them. He came up with a better steam engine. It was better than everything before, but it wasn't first. And then he took a patent. He took a patent, and at that time in England, a patent lasted 14 years. And James Watt lobbied with the British Parliament, and he got his patent extended to 30 years. And he would make sure that all the engineers in Cornwall who had their mines and who wanted to build steam engines would pay him royalties for his patent. And if they tried to do otherwise, he would sue them. Some of them actually took him to court and said that, look, we don't like his invention, we've come up with our own changes. And he sued them, and he won. Not only that, he sued inventors of better steam engines and made them bankrupt. There was a famous steam engine invented by Hornblower who was bankrupted by James Watt's lawsuit, so he had a better steam engine. He didn't make money, he just went bankrupt because of the patent infringement suits. So he blocked innovation. This was a case where the inventor came up with something new, but he stopped everyone else from inventing. And when the patent ended, Cornwall boycotted his company because they were so upset by having had to suffer his monopoly. Now this is a graph that shows the efficiency of steam engines over time. The vertical axis shows the power of steam engines, or their efficiency. And as you can see, in 1776, when James Watt invented his steam engine, it was much better than the previous one. But after that, during the lifetime of his patent, there wasn't very much improvement. Things were not much better, and they were all invented by Watt because he wouldn't allow anyone else to do anything. Then for 10 years, there was nothing, as everyone was benefiting from saving on royalties when they weren't paying anything, so they were saving money that way. And then you can see steam engine innovation improves dramatically. What happened in 1811? In 1811, the Cornish engineers, who were the main users and developers of steam engines, published something called Lean's Reporter, which was a journal where the blueprints of steam engines were published in full, the full specifications of steam engines, if you will, the source code of the steam engines, was published in full. And other engineers would read this. They would copy the steam engines that other people had used. They would make changes and improvements. And then they would publish their own changes and improvements in a later edition of Lean's Reporter. So they were sharing improvements to steam engines, and innovation rose dramatically as a result. And new inventors, realizing the value of this system of collaborative creativity, did not patent their steam engines. Now let's move forward a bit. In the late 90s, in the mid-90s actually, there were some websites like Hotwire, which was one of Hotwire and Yahoo were some of the early interactive websites with large-scale content. And they ran software called web servers, which made the websites run. And the users of these web servers, who were the administrators of the websites, they were user developers of web servers, and they decided to share their changes to web servers among themselves because they had common needs, just like the Cornish engineers. So they published the source code, the blueprints to their software, and they published the improvements, and the other developers could improve and share, and therefore the software improved rapidly, and the market share also improved rapidly. And as a result, many new inventors avoided proprietary protection for their software. So this chart shows the market share of web servers. Apache is the free software web server, that's in blue. And this is a timeline in months from August 1995 to May 2005. And the share of web servers increases in the same way. The red line is Microsoft and proprietary software. We're seeing a similar thing now with browsers, which is very different. But you've all got a Firefox lanyard that you're wearing around your necks. Firefox is a very popular free software browser that is growing dramatically in market share. Now, one question that people ask is, how does this work? How does it happen that when people are contributing, when people who are ordinarily, one would assume, greedy, selfish, and business-minded, rational self-interest is what governs everyone, according to economic theory. How do such people collaborate in a way that looks as if it's a bunch of altruists or communists or saints or whatever? How does it happen? To me, it doesn't seem to make sense that when you put a keyboard in front of people, they turn into saints or altruists or unselfish people. And as we see with the story of steam engines, this is something that has been going on without keyboards. But the Cornish engineers were not do-gooders. They were trying to do something for a profit. They were improving their minds. Why were they sharing? Why were they developing things collaboratively? Why were the people running web servers in the mid-90s doing that? Well, there is a reason why people can be selfish but nevertheless collaborate, and that's why it's been successful over history for a long time. And I'm going to illustrate that through the use of something I call the cooking pot model for creativity and sharing. And we start with barter. So here's a little drawing. I'm not very good at drawing, but you can figure out what that is. So there are two people, and they're engaging in a barter transaction. One person gives fish to the other in exchange for potatoes, and that's in one transaction. What happens in this situation is that each person feels that they get a benefit out of this relationship. When I give you fish and get potatoes in return, the value to me of the the fish I give is less than the value of the potatoes I receive. To you, on the other hand, the value of the fish you receive is more than the potatoes you gave. So we both feel that we made a profit. We both feel that something went right here. And this is true also when you have purchase transactions. When I exchange money and get potatoes in return, or when you give me money and get fish in return, there are two separate transactions taking place, but in each case, we value what we give in exchange for money for less than the money we get. We value the money that we get more than what we give for it. So if I bought a car from Toyota for $15,000 or whatever cars cost, I don't use cars, the value of the car to me is more than the money I paid for it. But the value of the car to the seller is less than what the seller pays for it. Which is why we all feel we make a profit and we all keep going on. And this is perfectly consistent with rational self-interest. Everyone is happy because everyone feels they benefit. But suppose we didn't have a transaction. Suppose we put all the stuff we had into a quick cooking pot. So this is the notion of a hypothetical tribal cooking pot where we realize that I have fish, you have potatoes. After we exchange, we still have fish and potatoes. Maybe if we put it into a common pot and make a stew, we'll be better off. I couldn't draw a pot, so I drew a cloud. When we put something into this pot, it doesn't really matter that there was someone at the end of it. So I put my fish in, I get my potatoes out, or I get my stew out, or whatever. I don't care who's at the other end of the pot. So the transaction doesn't matter. I just care that what I'm putting in is less than what I'm getting back for it, at least to me. And that's very important because that means that you can have the same motive, the same notion of rational self-interest working even without transactions. What is happening on the internet with Wikipedia, with free software, is not barter. Because barter, like the fish and the potatoes, requires a transaction. What is happening is a commons where you do not have transactions, or the transactions are implicit. But people can still work rationally in terms of rational self-interest, and you can have selfish people go out, collaborate in a way that looks as if they're not selfish because of this. Because people are putting in less than what they're getting out individually. Now, in a real cooking pot, you would have problems. Because if I put in one fish and you put in, 10 kilos of potatoes, and we get this stew out of it, we still have to divide it. We still have to decide how much I get out of it and how much you get out of it. So we still have to figure out how much it's worth. One thing that anthropologists who actually study tribes will tell you is that tribes aren't as unselfish as we imagine them to be. So they do fight over how to distribute the stuff that's held in common. So you would argue over how to share what's in the pot. And that doesn't solve things if you don't know how much went in and how much came out. So if you can't measure, it doesn't solve things. But what happens on the internet, or what happens with knowledge, is that the things that have been put into the pot aren't tangible. They are not things that you can drop on your toe. It's knowledge. And knowledge, well, the digital fish and potatoes, when they get into the pot, we don't have to divide it. We each get our copy of the whole pot. I put in one fish, and I get my own copy of everything that's there. You put in your potatoes, or your article, or your presentation, or your steal this film, or whatever, and you get your own personal copy of everything that's in there. And this means that it doesn't matter that there might be some people who aren't putting as much in as other people. As long as every individual who's participating feels that they benefit, and that gives them the incentive to continue to do this, the pot keeps cooking. What one might think from this is that some people feel that they are selfish, but they feel other people are generous. And that's exactly what we found in a couple of surveys. When we asked 3,000 free software developers what they think about whether they give as much as they take from the community, 70% said, I take more than I give, which is consistent with feeling that I'm selfish, because I put in some stuff, but I get so much more out of it. But they all assume that other people are more generous. Only less than 50% say others take as much as they give. So this system does show, even through surveys, that when you're putting in something and you're getting much more out of it, you assume others are very generous, because you can't really understand. Now, despite being free, there's a lot of value in this. We made an estimate that existing free software code, if a company was to recreate it, would cost a lot of money. That's 12 billion euro till 2005, and maybe 100 billion euro till 2010 for all the software, all the free software that's out there, if a company were to create it. So this cooking pot of people contributing for free actually generates things that is worth a lot of money. It's hard to do this. We haven't done this for, say, Creative Commons content, but one could imagine that there's an enormous amount of value out there. I don't think anyone thinks that because they're not paying for it, it's not valuable. So I'd just like to end by suggesting that the concept is very old. The concept of collaborative creativity is as old as sharing stories around the fireplace. What's new is the scale, using a network and the internet and speed. And that's where I will leave this. Thank you very much.